Good morning, friends, and welcome to Wake Up in the Word. We have made it to the middle of the week. It is a Wednesday. Thanks for joining me. We're going to be over in John's Gospel, chapter 6, because it's pointing us back to a passage in Exodus. So we're going to once again find Christ in the Old Testament. Grab a good cup of coffee and join me. Hope you're having a great day in the Lord. The world's going crazy. Things are wild everywhere, and you wonder what kind of world you've grown up in and what kind of world you're going to be giving your children. Let me tell you something, friends. You're going to be giving them a great world if you give them Jesus, because ultimately, He's the one that's going to straighten all this mess out. He is our eternal hope. He's the one we're looking forward to. But in the past, he was one that was taking care of the children of Israel even when they didn't realize it was him. What am I talking about? Well, first, let's go to John's Gospel, chapter 6, to give us reference toward an Old Testament story. And this particular story is the one that his disciples referenced when they said, "This teaching is hard. Who can accept it?" What could Jesus have said that was so hard that his disciples buckled at it? That his disciples just said, "Wow, Lord, you've given us some tough stuff before. This teaching is hard. Who can accept it?" Now I'm quoting John chapter 6, verse 60. What is he talking about? It's the teaching on the bread of life. Now, you can read the entire passage to get perspective on that, but I'm just going to go back to verse 30 in John's Gospel, chapter 6, where the people that have been following Jesus, by the way, after he has fed the 5,000, he gives a great illustration of what he's about to talk about, the great spiritual truth, by feeding the 5,000. And they asked Jesus a question. What's so funny is they ask this after he has fed the 5,000, he's walked on the water, and then they ask in verse 30, "Well, what sign then are you going to do so that we may see and believe you?" They asked, "What are you going to perform?" And I think the word perform in the CSB is quite telling. They wanted the Messiah, God in the flesh, to perform for them, do something so outlandish, so amazing, like David Copperfield on stage or something, that we'll just be able to gasp in awe and say, "Oh, wow, he must be the one." And listen to what they use as a reference point, verse 31. "Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, just as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat." So Jesus said to them in verse 32, "Truly I tell you, Moses didn't give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." So look at what he's saying. I'm the bread of God. The bread of heaven, the bread of God, rather, is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. So in verse 34, they said, "Well, sir, give us this bread always." And here's the statement. Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." He says that twice in this passage for emphasis. "I'm the bread of life," Jesus told them. "No one who comes to me will ever be hungry, and no one who believes in me will ever be thirsty again." What is this picture that we're talking about? Well, it's the bread that was given to the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness after they had escaped Pharaoh, crossed the Red Sea miraculously, and now here they are, this massive horde of people out in a desert where there's no food, there's nothing to eat. And this is the picture of Jesus that Paul references in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 and 4, when he says, "They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ." So here's the Apostle Paul pointing back to the Old Testament, saying, you want to see Jesus? There he was in the wilderness, providing for you. In our Walk Through the Bible devotional for this day on this fact, it says that after Israel was on the safe side of the Red Sea with Egypt behind them, the Egyptian army devastated by the waters, its people entered into a wilderness And of course, the exhilaration of their miraculous victory quickly gave way to complaints about their environment. You see, it seemed they had merely swapped a harsh life of slavery in Egypt for a brutal death in the wilderness. They had no food. They grumbled against Aaron and Moses, and by extension, against God. So God gave them manna to eat. Now, it was a hard-to-define wafer-like substance. If this tells you anything, the name manna, best as Hebrew scholars can tell, means, what is it? That's literally what manna means. What is it? Doesn't matter what it is, it's going to get you through. How about that? It was known as the bread from heaven, and the people were allowed to gather it every day except the Sabbath. And God sustained them with this substance throughout their wilderness years, an entire generation, until they entered the promised land. It wasn't a permanent provision. It was God's answer to an immediate need. It was vital nourishment for his people. Well, soon after, the people found themselves in a place with no water at all. They went through the same process, grumbling against Moses, putting God to the test until he responded with provision. In this case, God instructed Moses to strike a large rock with his staff, and water began to flow from the rock, and the people were able to drink. Moses called the place Massah and Meribah, testing and quarreling, because the people had tested God again and he had proven himself. Now in John chapter 6, and you can read the whole passage, verses 35 through 58, Jesus referred to himself as that true bread that comes down from heaven, a clear reference to manna, but with much bigger implications. He's the one who sustains God's people in the wilderness of this world. He's the nourishment of life. Without him, we starve. A chapter later, he referred to himself as the source of living, flowing water that brings life in its fullness. The implication of both of these is that not only the manna and the water from the rock in the wilderness symbolize Jesus and point to him, but he was also the guiding, sustaining presence of God for Israel in their wilderness wanderings. He saved them physically in the Old Testament, in a much deeper way in the New. He is now the provision for all of our needs. We sing about that when we truly worship. As I pointed out in one of those songs in my worship series, Honey in the Rock, one that we sang at First Baptist Winsboro by request, it's turned out to be quite a theme song. Because here you are in the most difficult time of life, perhaps, the most difficult of your wilderness wanderings. There's no food, only rocks. But God brings the sweetest, most wonderful substance of all from the rock. He brings honey. One line in that song basically says, I have all that I need. I have all that I need if I have Jesus, because he is our provision. He's going to see us through. And when the bills start coming in the mail, we've experienced that, whether they're from medical costs or other situations you're going through. And when suddenly issues around you at work, at school, begin to just challenge you, and it seems like you've wandered into a wilderness and you can't even get out of it. What's the key? Who is the source? How do you survive? Through the bread of life, Jesus. He's the one who says, that was me taking care of you in the wilderness, in the deepest wanderings of the people. I will take care of you in whatever situation you find yourself. And those may be desperate from time to time, but Jesus never leaves you. Jesus never fails. Jesus is always there. Friends, he was there in the Old Testament. He's definitely there for you today. So you call on him, become one of his followers, take the bread of life, and you'll never spiritually be hungry again. And then you'll find out that even physically, he provides for you and will take care of you in your deepest times of need. Well, God bless you. You have a great rest of the day in him, and we'll see you right here tomorrow when we wake up in his word.